Take two. I'm going to be breaking up the whole adventure files with a couple videos in between every now and then to break up the monotony. If you're getting tired of watching the adventure files of my absolute favorite game I ever played, well, you can watch these things in between and maybe enjoy them. This film I recently watched, and I see that mostly a lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people really, really enjoy it. The 5 stars on the thing, that's what they usually do. They try to pull you in. They show the best ratings on the cover saying, "This is my movie." Well, if you look at things like Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and all that other stuff, there's a lot of positive critics. If you go onto YouTube and watch reviews, there's a lot of positive critics. But there are some naysayers. There are a few people who would say that this film is not as good as you might be led to believe. And one voice that I ended up paying attention to said that because I like to listen to all the sides of the story, you know. So one voice, one of the detractors, said that the film was boring. It was uneventful. And I might be inclined to agree with that. But I also am inclined to agree that this film is a breath of fresh air in regards to the horror genre and all that other stuff. Because in regards to, like, mainstream horrors and all that other stuff, you see a bunch of jump scares and all that bullshit and startling fight-or-flight shit, and it's not scary. The way these horror films try to do things is they set up a story, they set up a scene, and the music starts just creeping up on you, and then suddenly, pah! They just give you a loud sound, a jolt! That's what we call a jump scare. It's one of the most unoriginal things, the unoriginal tropes that horror movies try to do to make you think that it's creative and shit like that. You know, to sort of make you feel like it's scary when it might not be. Hereditary, for me, is one of the original, not really original, but it's a breath of fresh air in regards to the horror film making trope. Film making, not necessarily story, but in film making sense. The angles, the shots, the scores, the editing. From that sense, it's a breath of fresh air. It's really good. It's really expertly shot, and I can really appreciate almost every scene. Every line of dialogue builds into something that comes later, or answers something that happened earlier. But I do agree that it can get boring. So this film has a good first act. It has a second act that is very bloated, and you probably could have cut it a little bit. And it has a decent third act. So basically, it's a good movie sandwiched in between something that's not as fresh. So you have a really fresh bun, top bun, bottom bun, but the meat is probably a day or two old. That's a good analogy, actually. We're going to break down this film and try to discuss what goes on in here and what people might be seeing, what I saw in particular. Because this film to me feels like a movie like Donnie Darko, a psychological thriller type film, and the type of typical horror movie trope that maybe the Paranormal Activity series, at least 1 through 4, were trying to portray. I might make a video series about the Paranormal Activity movies. Oh, well, I definitely will, actually, at some point. But it felt like a merge of that. A tired trope and a really good film. So we got a really good film and a tired story trope. So you can understand why some people might be put off by it, while other people might be put on by it, you know? And from a horror movie perspective, it's like a psychological horror, art house psychological horror. And it makes sense, because when you look on the side here, you see A24. A24 is one of those really good film production houses. They've made some really good films these past few years. We have The Lighthouse, we have Under the Silver Lake, The VV Itch, The Witch, Midsummer, Uncut Gems, and Hereditary. These are all really, really good films. They're really good films, all in their own right. Some of them might be tired in some places. them might be overly done or whatever, but in various aspects, people can appreciate them. People appreciate Uncut Gems for bringing out the best in Adam Sandler. People could appreciate Lighthouse for its minimalist and filmmaking approach that actually keeps you on the edge of your seat for the entire film. People could appreciate Under the Silver Lake for its abstract method of storytelling. People could appreciate Midsummer for its abstract way of telling a breakup story. People could appreciate The Witch for just being a very creepy film. And then there's Hereditary. People could appreciate this for being a breath of fresh air to the horror genre. And I'm inclined to agree with the breath of fresh air bit. So the film does focus on mainly a family. The family of a father, a mother, and their 2 children. It focuses on them primarily. The mother and the son, Peter, are the 2 main characters. The daughter, Charlie, and the father, whose name I don't think they even mention except a couple times. I'm just going to call him the father. Those 2 are the lesser important characters. It's mostly about the mother and her son, Peter. The daughter's named Charlie, by the way. So I know the children's names. I don't know the parents' names. Funny. So, we open our film with a funeral. The grandmother has just passed away. And we learned that the mother didn't really care about her. The whole family didn't really care about her, except for maybe Charlie. She was the only one who really cared about Grandma and all that stuff. But everybody else, they didn't really care about her. The son didn't know her. The father knew that his wife didn't care about her. And the mother's practically partying after the grandmother died. Now, what the mother does for a living is she works at home. She makes these little miniatures. She makes miniatures of, like, crime scenes or houses and things like that. She makes very, very detailed, artistic miniature homes where you can view all of this stuff in really, really good ways. And I can appreciate it. I could really appreciate what she does. I think that's a really, really cool profession. I couldn't do something like that, but I could really appreciate miniatures. I really like those things. Well, one miniature was their house that she was making. She was making a miniature of their house. The grandmother in it, the mother, the father, the children, all that stuff. The miniature of the grandmother is in a certain room, and the mother's like, huh. And then she looks up from one of the grandmother's boxes, and she sees a figure in the darkness, a silhouette. And there's no jump scare, there's no creepy music, it's very quiet. This is a very quiet movie in regards to its scares. It has maybe one jump scare. Everything is very quiet. But all the imagery is unsettling, and it lets you soak it in. It lets you soak in the horror. And that is what makes it succeed, in my opinion, in regards to being horror. It lets the scene scare you rather than the loud noise, if that makes sense. Because the grandmother, the little figure in the darkness, it really did unsettle me. Because there's a really good detail. You can see that she's smiling at you, but it's so dark you can't really quite make out anything, but you know that something's there that shouldn't be there. Then the mother turns on the lights in the room, and she's gone. She's gone. It's a very quiet scene. In fact, the sound effects are louder. You could, like, hear the light switch over all the other atmospheric ambience. It just... I liked it. I really liked it. And then comes a very dumb scene. So we introduce Charlie, and she's like experiencing spooky shit, right? She's experiencing a bunch of spooky shit. There's things that she's seeing, and she's sleeping in tree houses in the middle of the night, and she's a very weird kid. And she clearly knows the way. That might be why she's so weird, because she knows the way. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Who knows the way and does this? Think about it. Let that sink in a moment. Because every time she does it, I chuckled, because that's what I associated it with. Do you know the way, my brother? In fact, whenever she looks at Peter and clicks, I'm like, do you know the way, my brother? That's what I found funny. I laughed unintentionally throughout this film. It's not because it's funny. It's because I thought of something that was funny associated with what's going on here. But I don't know why she clicks. I don't know why she clicks. But she does. She clicks. She does. That's whatever. It's whatever. So the dumb thing that happens, though, is that the mother is trying to get Charlie to acclimate, to be more social, right? Well, she does this in the worst way possible. Peter wants to go to a party where a girl that he likes is. So he wants to go to this party where this girl is, get high with this girl, and maybe score with this girl, because, he's a hormonal teenager, and that's what hormonal teenagers do, right? So he's trying to do that. And the mother's like, well, take your sister with you to the party. She might make some friends. You could see that the mother's so out of touch with reality that she doesn't seem to realize that Charlie is 12 or 13. She is not a high schooler. She is not acclimated to high school life. And probably going to a party where a bunch of high schoolers are is probably not the best thing you could do. It's probably not. A 5-year difference to adults over 25 is nothing. But a 5-year difference to people under the age of 18, it's huge. 13 and 18, that's middle school and almost finishing high school. Big difference. Big, big difference. So, of course, Charlie doesn't want to go. Peter doesn't want her to go. Neither one wants Charlie to go. But the mother makes her go. Otherwise, she's not going to let Peter go. So, they go to the party, and Charlie sticks out like a sore thumb. She doesn't know anybody there. Everybody's an adult, practically. Everybody's an older teenager. They're all doing shit. They're drinking, they're smoking, they're having sex, and Charlie's just standing out. She's like, I want to go home. I don't feel comfortable here, because, of course she wouldn't. She's at a party where a bunch of people are older than her. It's like taking a child to a hookah bar. There's some things that they stick out with. And the mother just made a very bad mistake here. She doesn't really... she was out of touch with the reality in this decision-making, whatever. I get her intentions, but she was out of touch here. Out of touch with the reality here. Peter, though, he wants to score with the girl that he likes. So he's like, look, Charlie, look, they're having cake. Why don't you go eat a cake? And go eat a cake and leave me alone so I can go maybe fuck this girl. So Charlie goes to eat some cake. Now, in the beginning of the film, we hear that they're handing out finger food at this funeral that they're attending for the grandmother, and Charlie's mentioning that she has an allergic reaction to certain things, I think nuts or something, and that ties into what's in the cake. There's nuts in the cake. So when Charlie's eating the cake while Peter's upstairs getting stoned with the girl that he likes in the hopes of maybe making it out and boinking her, Charlie goes upstairs. Her throat's constricting. You could see that her face is a bit swollen. She's saying, Peter, I can't breathe. So now Peter, stoned as fuck, takes Charlie into the van and drives like a madman. And apparently they live in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. They live in nowhere, Kansas, right? Because there's nothing. They're driving. Peter is driving like a madman down this road, and there's nothing. This is an incredibly rural area, and I do not know why they live here. How far away is everything? Fuck. I just thought that was weird, but, it's a typical trope, that horror shit, that everybody's out in the middle of nowhere, and all the horror happens out in the middle of nowhere, because there's nothing around for you to go to get help, yada, 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 yada. So Peter's stoned out of his mind, driving 1,000,000 miles an hour on a road in the middle of the night, no street lights, no street lamps. It's very rural. Peter, Charlie, she can't breathe. She's in the backseat. She opens the window to lean out to try to breathe, Now Peter, he's driving like a madman. He looks out the middle of the road and sees there's a corpse of deer. He's like, oh shit, I gotta swerve away so I don't hit that. And there's a sign, a stop sign or something, right next to the corpse of the deer, right next to it. So the placement is like, here's the corpse, here's a street sign. Peter's coming, he swerves to avoid the corpse. And Charlie's head is out. He's going... It happens in a blink of an eye. A blink of an eye. And then Peter slams on the brakes. The camera focuses in only on Peter. He's breathing heavy. He's in shock. He does not want to look at the back seat. Something slumps down quietly, voicelessly. He does not want to look at the back seat. He moves the dash so that he can't see what's in the back seat. The camera intentionally darkens the back seat so that you can't see it either. But I was laughing. Why was I laughing at something so dark, so brilliantly filmed? It's because I have a terrible sense of humor, and I'm probably mentally unhinged, and I think of funny things when I probably shouldn't be thinking of funny things. You see, I watched Pulp Fiction a couple weeks ago, and Samuel Jackson and John Travolta are driving in a car, and there's a dude in the backseat that they're holding at gunpoint. Well, John Travolta's holding at gunpoint. Sam Jackson runs over some sort of speed bump. The speed bump causes John Travolta's finger to twitch, and suddenly the gun fires. And the guy in the backseat just explodes everywhere. And there's blood all over the place, and they're now bickering, going like, what the fuck, blah, 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 blah. And John Travolta's like, well, you ran over a speed bump, but my finger, blah. And Sam Jackson's like, there was no speed bump, there was a bump the road. It was a very funny scene. It was a very funny scene. And that's all I can think about, how sudden that there was. This was using that type of filmmaking to make a very serious undertone. But all I could think of was the comical undertone that Pulp Fiction pulled off. But I could appreciate a very smart filmmaking scene like this. I could really appreciate it. And a normal person probably wouldn't associate the Pulp Fiction scene to this. A normal person probably would be very unnerved and creeped out by what would happen. They probably would have jumped from that without the jump scare even being needed. They would have jumped just from the sign hitting and the head not being there and all that stuff. Peter drives home in quiet silence. He refuses to look in the back seat. He drives home. He goes upstairs. He goes into his bed. He lays down. He pulls the covers up, and he stares at the wall all night. Morning comes. The mother goes downstairs to run an errand, and suddenly she's screaming. The camera has not changed from staring at Peter's face. Peter is staring at us. And the mother is screaming downstairs, and we can hear that she is freaking out over what's in the back seat, and the father's freaking out over what's in the back seat. It's a very powerful filmmaking. I really liked that. I really liked this setup. Everything up to this moment was expertly filmed. It was expertly filmed. I liked it. But then we have a very bloated second act, which I'm just going to give you a TLDR for. It's very bloated. You could cut some of it out. But here's the highlights. The mother is grieving over Charlie's death, and she blames her son Peter for it. She goes to counseling services, group counseling services, and she lies about it to the father and says she's just going to see a movie or some shit. Well, she's going to counseling services where she meets Joan. Joan is another lady who is also there who has lost somebody, a loved one, or so she claims. And the mother and Joan bond. And then they do a seance where Joan tries to contact her son, and the mother is visibly freaked out about this. So she tries to do this same seance and takes the instruction booklet that Joan gives her to try to summon Charlie so that they could talk to Charlie. The mother brings the father and Peter downstairs and tries to invoke this, reading the Enochian script from the instructions Joan gave her, and Peter starts to get visibly freaked out by this. Every syllable that the mother's uttering, Peter is freaking out about it. You can see that the body language, Peter's not saying anything. You would see that something is happening to him. And you can see that this might not actually be a seance like we initially believed. And this was a very powerful scene. There was a dinner scene that happened prior to this that was a really powerful scene. The mother blames Peter for the death, and it was a very powerful dinner scene. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but they spent a lot of time on that dinner scene. It's very hard to watch in some places because of just how raw the emotions that the parents, the mother and Peter are giving off. You can see that they are butting heads a lot because of this. And it's true that they are both to blame for Charlie's death. Peter got stoned out of his mind, and the mother made Charlie go to this party when she probably shouldn't have. And they are both hurting because of it. And it's really expertly filmed, and really, really expertly acted. And the father's just struggling to keep everything together, hold everybody together. And really all I could think about with the father was the father in A Haunting in Connecticut. That's all I could think about. The father is basically the skeptic of the group. You know, he's the skeptic. He doesn't want to entertain the spooky shit that the mother's getting into. And he's thinking that the son is visibly freaked out because the mother's blaming him and all that shit. And he's going like, I have a son to protect, to the mother, and he's trying, like, saying that he's going to leave with Peter and all that stuff, and the mother's trying to freak out, and then she realizes that the seance is actually summoning a demon or some shit into the house, and she realizes that Joan and the grandmother were actually under the same witch cult, and now she's like, alright, I gotta burn this catalyst that we used in this ritual, which is Charlie's notebook. So she tosses the notebook into the fireplace, and suddenly the mother's arm catches on fire because of it. So now she pulls the notebook out, saying, my life force is tied to this book, and she's like, oh shit, I don't know about that, blah, 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 blah. But then then Peter starts to get, like, visibly freaked out, and he's seeing things during the day, and has nightmares at night. And in one scene during lunch at his school, he turns and looks across the street, and there's Joan standing there across the street, yelling at Peter, saying, get out, Peter, get out. You don't understand what that means, but you will later. So, at the fulcrum, the start of the third act, finally, the mother tries to get the father to throw Charlie's notebook into the fireplace. The mother thinks that she's going to burn up and die from it, but she's prepared to do this to save Peter. And the father is not entertaining this. She's not entertaining this shit anymore. He's, like, done. He's completely done with this. There's no more love in the family for any of this shit. He is fucking done. But the mother tosses the notebook into the fireplace anyways, but suddenly the father bursts into flames. A little bit of a trolling act there, I guess. I don't know. So the father burns up and dies, and suddenly the mother starts to shake it, and you think that she might be possessed now. Now, what happens next is possibly the best scene in the film. There is one jump scare in this entire 20-minute segment, but it only happens near the end of the 20-minute segment. At the first start, Peter wakes up from an accident at school. He wakes up and everything's quiet. There's no OST and there's no music playing. He's just waking up in the darkness. Everything's quiet. The camera pans out, and there's something in the corner of the room on the ceiling. It's the mother. You can see she's possessed by some shit, and she's just up on the ceiling staring at Peter. And she's out of focus. The camera focus, the lens focuses on Peter. He's the one that's in focus and on blurry. The mother is blurry and kept in the dark. When Peter starts to realize there might be something on the ceiling, he turns, but the mother starts to move. She floats through the air, across the ceiling, and out the door. And he doesn't see anything on the ceiling anymore. Peter starts calling out for his parents. He doesn't know what's going on. He goes downstairs, and you can see that the mother's on the ceiling in the corner again, and he sees the father's burnt-out corpse in front of the fireplace. Now he's starting to freak out, and suddenly, a creak is heard. The camera focuses out on Peter and now focuses on the mother in the corner on the ceiling. Just for a split second, the mother is in focus. That's when you realize that you as an audience, you and Peter both realize that Peter realizes there's something behind him. And that's when the first jump scare, the first and only real jump scare happens. There's no jolt of sound or anything like that, no. He turns around, the mother just starts to... He turns around, not the mother yet, she vanishes yet. He turns around, he sees a naked person at the doorway. Just a naked person smiling at him. There's no music yet. It's quiet. Peter's visibly freaked out that there's some naked person standing there, and suddenly the mother is out of the corner running at him, and that's your jump scare. There's the one jump scare in the whole film. The mother just starts to chase Peter, and Peter's running away from the mother, and he rushes up to the attic and pulls up the pole ladder to prevent the mother from chasing him. And the mother's like banging on the ceiling, and Peter's like freaking out, going like, "Go away, Mom, I'm sorry, Mom, blah, blah, blah." And then you see that the mother's banging her head against the wall repeatedly, very freakily. It's very, very unnerving. Now the sound starts to crescendo as we get to the climax of this tale. Peter turns around, he sees some sort of ritual circle or some shit going on. And he looks up and he sees the Enochian script. There's some very bad juju going on. And he turns around and he sees the mother's back. The mother is back floating up in the air, trying to saw her neck off. She's trying to saw her neck off in front of Peter, and Peter's like visibly freaking out again. And then he turns around to look around the room, and he sees that there's more naked people. There's 3 naked people in the corner smiling at him. One of them even waves at him. And Peter's like, "Ah!" And he jumps out the fucking window and does a nosedive faceplant to the ground below. And then you see some orb of light float into Peter's body, and that's when Peter wakes up. And the mother stops sawing her head off after this. Everything goes quiet. Peter wakes up. Something different about him. Peter knows the way now. He makes his way to the treehouse. There's a light on in the treehouse. And there's a bunch of naked people in the treehouse. And they crown him King Paimon. And the scene ends. And now you probably understand why Joan was yelling at Peter to get out. She was actually yelling at Peter's soul to leave the body so that Paimon's spirit could inhabit it as a new host. Because Paimon couldn't fully possess Peter while Peter was in the body with it. There would always be some sort of friction, conflict between the two trying to take control. Peter had to leave. He had to get out of his body so that Paimon could take it over. And that's what happens at the end. Peter does a nosedive out of the attic, and the fall kills him. And Paimon's orb of light soul inhabits the body. So everything after Peter jumps out the window is Paimon inhabiting Peter's body now. And, yeah. One jump scare in the whole film. I thought this was an expertly shot film. I really did. I thought it was expertly shot, expertly woven. A lot of good takes, long takes, good camera work, good editing, good acting from all of the characters. Every scene leads into another expertly, but that second act was long. It felt long, and I can understand some people might find it boring. This film has more in common with a Donnie Darko than it does a typical horror movie. It feels like a psychological horror. It's not meant to scare you like, ooh, look at the spooky ghost. No, it's not meant to scare you like that. It's meant to mentally make you work at your mind. It's meant to get at your mind, like a Shutter Island type of aspect, you know, like a Secret Window type of aspect. It's meant to psychologically get at you. But it's shot and told, the story is shot and told like a horror film, despite it being a psychological thriller. And I thought that was like a unique breath of fresh air to this type of genre. We don't get too many Donnie Darkos. We don't get too many Hereditaries. And so long as we don't get too many of them, and that we get maybe a Hereditary every now and then, that's what makes everybody flock to these films, saying that they're so good. Because we are not overly saturated with films that are like this. You might say it's pretentious, and you might be right, but I would say that it's definitely deserving at least of 4 of these 5 stars. I'd say it's definitely deserving at least 4 of them. It is a breath of fresh air, and I really liked it. But that second act is bloated. It is bloated. It is bloated. But I watched it. And I could enjoy it. I might even watch it again sometime. I might call this a discussion files video, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. What did you think of Hereditary? Make a comment below. And remember, be imaginative.